I'm Lily, 20, female, and for my 18th birthday, my parents gave me a car that was designed to be my last. They didn't want a daughter. They wanted a second son, and their failure to get one was a disappointment they were willing to erase from the road. They didn't succeed. They just succeeded in losing everything. Growing up, our family home was less a single unit and more a solar system with one bright, shining sun, my older brother, Ethan. My parents, Richard and Alina, were the planets in a constant, devoted orbit around him. And I was a distant, barely there moon, reflecting a sliver of the warmth meant for him, but never feeling any of it directly. This wasn't something I realized in a sudden epiphany. It was a truth I learned gradually, like a language spoken only through actions, through 1,000 tiny cuts and a few gaping wounds. My father, Richard, was an accountant, a man who saw the world in ledgers and balanced accounts. Ethan was his prime asset, a blue-chip stock destined for greatness. I was a recurring, regrettable expense. My mother, Alina, a kindergarten teacher of all things, poured all the nurturing and pride she possessed into her son, the one who carried the family name with the right gender attached. For me, her affection was like a tap she'd turned off, leaving only a cold, metallic emptiness. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It was the very architecture of our household. I remember my 8th birthday. I had my heart set on a specific bicycle from the local toy store, a bright blue one with silver streamers on the handlebars. I had talked about it for weeks, circling it in catalogs and leaving not-so-subtle hints. When the day came, I was buzzing with excitement. My parents presented me with a large, rectangular box, but inside wasn't the bike. It was a set of encyclopedias. "Knowledge is the greatest gift, Lily," my father had said, his voice flat and instructive. "A bicycle is a frivolous thing, it rusts." I tried to smile to look grateful, but my heart felt like a lead weight in my chest. Later that afternoon, from my bedroom window, I watched my father and Ethan in the backyard. My father was patiently teaching Ethan, who was 10 at the time, how to throw a perfect spiral with a brand new, top-of-the-line football. He had bought it for him that same day, just because. The laughter they shared drifted up to my window, a sound that felt more alienating than any silence. I looked at the encyclopedias, their glossy pages and sterile facts, and understood. My desires were frivolous. Ethan's were celebrated. Another memory, sharper and more painful, is etched into my mind from my sophomore year of high school. The school hosted an annual science fair, a huge event that I poured my soul into. As a budding engineering student, this was my domain. I spent months designing and building a small, solar-powered water purification system. It was complex, it was innovative, and on the night of the fair, it actually worked. I stood by my display, my heart thumping with pride, as judges and teachers stopped by, impressed. My parents were required to attend. They arrived late. My mother walked past my project with a cursory glance, her eyes scanning the gymnasium for Ethan, who was standing with his friends by the refreshment table. My father stopped for a moment, looked at my intricate system of tubes and filters, and nodded slowly. "That's a lot of work, Lily," he commented, not with pride, but with a tone one might use to describe a tedious but completed chore. "Make sure you clean it all up properly when you're done." They spent less than 5 minutes at my station before migrating over to Ethan. He hadn't even participated in the fair. He was just there. And yet, they stood with him for over half an hour, laughing, my mother fussing with his collar, my father putting a proud hand on his shoulder. I won second place that night. When I came home with the ribbon, my parents were already in their room. I left the ribbon on the kitchen counter. The next morning, it was gone, likely swept into the trash with the day-old newspaper. It was as if my achievement was an inconvenience, a small blip of static in the broadcast of Ethan's golden life. The most telling event, however, came on Ethan's 18th birthday, 2 years before mine. This was the harbinger of what was to come for me. For months, my parents had been whispering excitedly, poring over brochures and websites. The reveal was a grand affair. After a fancy dinner at our family's favorite steakhouse, we returned home to find a brand new graphite gray sedan parked in the driveway, a massive red bow on its hood. It was a Honda Accord, the latest model, renowned for its safety and reliability. For you, son, my father announced, his voice thick with emotion as he handed Ethan the keys. To take you safely on your road to success. My mother was openly weeping with joy. We are so proud of the man you've become, Ethan, she said, hugging him tightly. Ethan was, of course, ecstatic. He was a good brother in his own way. He wasn't malicious towards me, just blissfully, ignorantly self-absorbed. He was the sun, and it never occurred to him to wonder why the other celestial bodies in his orbit were so cold and dark. He gave me a ride in his new car, the new car smell filling my lungs with a sense of second-hand joy and a first-hand, bitter envy. I was happy for him, but I was also acutely aware that this glorious, safe, expensive gift was a testament to a love I would never receive. It was a symbol of his value in our family. I never imagined then what symbol my own 18th birthday gift would become. I knew it wouldn't be a new car. I knew it wouldn't be a grand gesture. I expected a token, an afterthought, a quiet acknowledgement that I had, once again, cost them time and money. I never, ever expected a death trap. I never imagined that the ledger my father kept had me balanced in the loss column, and that he and my mother were ready to finally write me off. The morning of my 18th birthday was unnervingly quiet. There was no festive atmosphere, no balloons, no pile of presents waiting by my breakfast plate. There was just a single, plain white envelope on the kitchen table with my name on it. My parents were already seated, nursing their cups of coffee with a strange, placid stillness. Elinor offered me a thin, tight-lipped smile. Richard just nodded, his eyes unreadable. "Happy birthday, Lily," my mother said, her voice lacking any genuine warmth. It was a line delivered by rote. I opened the envelope. Inside was a generic birthday card with a $20 bill. The message was simple: "Congratulations on your milestone, Mom and Dad." It felt less like a birthday wish and more like a formal notice. "Thank you," I murmured, tucking the bill into my pocket. The silence that followed was heavy and awkward. "We have something else for you," my father announced, finally looking at me. "Outside." A flicker of confused hope ignited in my chest. Maybe they were trying. Maybe they had finally decided to acknowledge me. Ethan, who had come downstairs, gave me an encouraging grin. "Go on, check it out," he said, clearly in on this part of the surprise. I walked to the front door and opened it. Parked at the curb, where Ethan's gleaming Accord was usually positioned, was a car. But it wasn't new. It was a very old, faded blue Subaru hatchback, at least 15 years old. Patches of rust dotted the wheel wells like a disease, and one of the hubcaps was missing. There was a small, sad-looking bow taped to the antenna, already drooping in the morning humidity. This was it. This was my grand 18th birthday gift, a relic. My father and mother had followed me out onto the porch, their expressions a mixture of feigned generosity and something else, something I couldn't quite place at the time, but would later recognize as cold anticipation. "She's not much to look at," my father said, patting the rusted hood with a hollow thud, "but she'll get you from a to be we got a good deal on her." "Thank you," I said, the words feeling like dust in my mouth. The contrast between this rust bucket and Ethan's pristine sedan was a physical blow. It wasn't just a cheaper car, it was a statement. Ethan's car was an investment in his future. Mine was a scrap heap, a clear message of my worth. "It has character," my mother added with a saccharine smile. "You're a practical girl, Lily. We knew you wouldn't want us to make a big fuss." It was a classic move of theirs, twisting their neglect into a virtue they had assigned to me. I wasn't high maintenance, I was simply never maintained. Ethan came over and slapped the roof. "A classic, you can fix her up. It'll be like a project." He was trying to be supportive, but his words only highlighted the disparity. His car was perfect. Mine was a project. I slid into the driver's seat. The interior smelled of mildew and stale cigarettes. The upholstery was ripped in several places, and the dashboard was cracked. When I turned the key, the engine sputtered and coughed violently before reluctantly turning over with a rattling groan that sounded like a coffee can full of bolts. "She's just a little cold," my father said quickly. "Needs to warm up." Despite the profound disappointment, a part of me, the engineering student part, was grimly determined. Fine, I would take this piece of junk and make it work. I would learn to fix it. I would pour my own money and effort into it and make it reliable. I would not let their insulting gesture defeat me. I spent the next 2 weeks driving it cautiously. It was noisy, shaky, and the brakes felt mushy and unreliable. I mentioned the brakes to my father, who waved it off. "Old cars are like that," he'd said. "You just have to pump them a bit." The incident happened on a Friday afternoon. I was on my way to visit a friend from college who lived one town over, a trip thaw. T required a 10-mile stretch on the interstate. As I merged onto the highway, I felt the car lurch. The rattling from the engine grew louder, more frantic. I glanced at the dashboard. The temperature gauge was spiking into the red. Panic began to prickle at the back of my neck. I decided to pull off at the next exit, which was about a mile away. I eased my foot off the accelerator, but the car didn't seem to slow down much. A strange, acrid smell, like burning oil, started to seep through the vents. Then I saw it, a wisp of pale smoke curling out from under the hood. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was bad. I needed to get to the shoulder immediately. I flicked on my hazard lights and began to steer the car toward the right lane. Cars whizzed past me at 70 miles per hour, their drivers honking, some gesturing angrily. I pressed the brake pedal. Nothing. It went straight to the floor, soft and useless. A wave of pure, cold terror washed over me. I pumped the pedal frantically, just as my father had told me to, but there was no resistance, no purchase, nothing. The car was still hurtling forward at over 50 miles per hour, completely out of my control. The smoke from the hood was thicker now, turning from white to a greasy, ominous gray. The burning smell was overwhelming. I yanked the emergency brake. There was a horrible grinding sound, but the car barely slowed. The exit ramp was coming up too fast. I knew I wouldn't make it. My only option was the shoulder. I wrestled with the steering wheel, trying to guide the car out of the flow of traffic. The engine made a loud pop, followed by a metallic shriek. And then I saw flames. Small, angry orange tongues of fire began to lick out from the gap between the hood and the fender. This wasn't just a breakdown, the car was on fire. Adrenaline surged through me, overriding the fear. I managed to swerve the car onto the gravel shoulder. It bumped and scraped to a halt, the engine now making a terrifying roaring sound. I didn't even turn it off. My only thought was to get out. I fumbled with the seatbelt buckle. It was stuck. I pulled and yanked, my fingers clumsy with panic. The flames were growing, climbing up the windshield. For a horrifying second, I thought I was trapped. I was going to burn alive in this metal coffin my parents had given me. With a final, desperate wrench, the buckle released. I threw the door open and scrambled out, not even bothering to grab my purse or my phone. I ran. I didn't look back until I was 100 feet away. The Subaru was engulfed in flames. A pillar of thick, black smoke billowed into the sky. Just as a passing truck driver pulled over to help, the car's engine gave a final, explosive bang, sending a shower of sparks and debris into the air. I stood there on the side of the highway, my legs trembling so hard I could barely stand. The sound of sirens grew in the distance. I watched the car burn, the gift from my parents, and the cold anticipation I had seen in their eyes that morning finally made sense. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't bad luck. This was what they wanted. The flashing lights of a fire truck and 2 police cruisers bathed the scene in a chaotic strobing of red and blue. Firefighters were dousing what was left of the Subaru in a thick cloud of white foam. The acrid smell of burnt plastic and rubber hung heavy in the air. A paramedic had checked me over, wrapped a coarse, gray blanket around my shoulders, and pronounced me physically unharmed, which felt like a cosmic joke. I was shaking uncontrollably, not from cold, but from a deep cellular shock. I used a police officer's phone to make the one call I had to. Home. My mother answered on the second ring. "Hello." "Mom, it's me, it's Lily." My voice was a hoarse whisper. Lily, where are you? You were supposed to be at your friend's house an hour ago. Her tone wasn't one of worry, but of mild annoyance, as if I'd missed a curfew. There was an accident, I said, my teeth chattering. The car, it caught on fire. On the highway, it's gone. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I expected to hear a gasp, a frantic question about my well-being, a rush of parental concern. Instead, what I heard was a quiet, indrawn breath followed by a strained, "Oh, I see." Another pause. "Is that all?" The question hit me with the force of a physical slap. Is that all? My car had just exploded. I had narrowly escaped being burned alive, and she was asking if that was all. "I'm fine," I managed to say, the words tasting like ash. "The police are here. I need a ride." "Your father and I are in the middle of something right now, Lily," she said, her voice tight and cold. "This is very inconvenient. Can't the police bring you home?" I couldn't breathe. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of my lungs. They were in the middle of something. My near-death experience was an inconvenience. The suspicion Hat had been a faint whisper in the back of my mind began to scream. They weren't just indifferent, they were disappointed. Disappointed that their plan, their neat and tidy solution to the Lily problem, had failed. "I'll find another way," I said numbly, and hung up before she could respond. The police officer, a kind-faced man named Officer Miller, gave me a pitying look. "No luck." "They're busy," I said, shame and rage warring within me. Eventually, Officer Miller, seeing I had no one else, drove me home himself. The 40-minute drive was silent. I just stared out the window, watching the world go by, feeling completely detached from it. When we pulled up to my house, Ethan's pristine gray Accord was in the driveway. A light was on in the living room. They were home. They hadn't been in the middle of something. They had just not wanted to come. My parents opened the door before I could even get out of the squad car. Their faces were masks of performative concern, likely for the benefit of the officer. "Oh, Lily, thank goodness you're safe," my mother exclaimed, rushing forward, but her arms didn't wrap around me in a hug. They just hovered near my shoulders, a gesture without substance. My father addressed the officer. "Thank you for bringing her home, officer. We were just about to leave when she called. We were frantic." It was such a blatant, effortless lie. I looked from his face to my mother's, and for the first time I saw them clearly. I saw the flicker of frustration in my father's eyes. I saw the deep, chilling disappointment in my mother's forced smile. They weren't relieved that I was alive. They were annoyed that I was still here. After the officer left, the facade crumbled instantly. "Well, that's the end of that car," my father said, crossing his arms. His tone was accusatory, as if I had somehow done this on purpose. "I told you it was a delicate machine." "All that money just gone up in smoke," my mother added, shaking her head as she walked into the kitchen. "Literally." I stood in the entryway, the scratchy police blanket still around my shoulders, and stared at them. "The brakes failed," I said, my voice shaking with a new, cold fury. "And it caught fire. I could have died." My father scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic, Lily. It was an old car. These things happen. You probably flooded the engine or something." "I did not flood the engine," I shot back, my voice rising. "The brake line must have been cut or leaking, and the fuel line." "Oh, here we go," my mother called from the kitchen. "Little Miss Engineer with all her theories. Lily, you got a free car and you managed to destroy it in 2 weeks. Just accept some responsibility." Ethan came downstairs then, drawn by the commotion. He took one look at me, disheveled, soot-stained, and wrapped in a police blanket, and his eyes widened in genuine shock. "Lily, what happened? Are you okay?" He was the only person in my family whose first reaction was concern for my life. "The car burned up," I said, looking at him, "on the highway." "What?" Ethan looked from me to our parents. "Is she okay? What's going on?" "She's fine," our father said dismissively. "She was being careless with the car we bought her, and now it's a pile of scrap. End of story." "Careless?" Ethan was incredulous. "Dad, her car exploded. How can you be so calm about this?" "Because your sister has a flair for the dramatic," our mother said, re-emerging from the kitchen. "She's fine, the car is not. That is the long and short of it." The cold, clinical way they discussed it, as if it were a minor financial setback and not a terrifying brush with death, was the final piece of the puzzle. My suspicion was no longer a theory, it was a bone-deep certainty. They had known. They had bought that car knowing it was unsafe. They had given it to me, their unwanted daughter, and hoped the problem would solve itself on some lonely stretch of road. I looked at their faces, so familiar and yet suddenly so monstrous, and I knew I couldn't stay under their roof another night. But I couldn't just leave. I needed proof. I needed to know, for certain, what they had done. And I knew there was only one person who could help me get it. My Uncle David was the black sheep of the family, and for that reason, he had always been my silent favorite. He was my father's younger brother, a man who had traded the family's obsession with white-collar respectability for the grease-stained satisfaction of being a master mechanic. He owned his own garage on the other side of town, a place my father referred to with a sneer as that greasy workshop. A bitter argument between the brothers a decade ago, something about a loan my father refused to give, had fractured their relationship completely. We rarely saw David, but on the few occasions he'd been at family gatherings, he had always treated me with a gruff, simple kindness that felt more genuine than any of my parents' hollow gestures. The day after the fire, I took a bus to his garage. The place smelled of oil, metal, and hard work. David was underneath a pickup truck, his legs sticking out. I cleared my throat. "Uncle David." The clanging stopped. He slid out on a creeper, wiping his greasy hands on an already filthy rag. He was a big man, with my father's build but with kinder eyes. He looked me up and down, his brow furrowing. "Lily, what in the world are you doing here? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I almost became one," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I told him everything. I told him about the car, the rust, the mushy brakes. I described in minute technical detail what had happened on the highway, the lurch, the smell, the brake pedal going to the floor, the smoke, the fire. As I spoke, his expression shifted from curiosity to intense, focused concern. He wasn't just listening, he was analyzing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "A '98 Subaru, you said, faded blue." "Yes, how did you know?" His face hardened. "Because a guy brought it into my shop about a month ago, wanted me to do a quick inspection. Said he was thinking of selling it. The thing was a complete wreck. I told him it wasn't even worth the scrap metal. The frame was rusted through, the engine was shot, and the brake lines were corroded so badly they looked like they could crumble if you stared at them too hard." A cold dread washed over me. What did this guy look like? "Tall," David said, his eyes narrowing. "Early 50s, dressed like an accountant, had a condescending way about him." My blood ran cold. It was my father. He had brought the car to a professional mechanic who had explicitly told him it was a dangerous wreck. And he bought it anyway. "I need your help, Uncle David," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I need you to look at it, what's left of it. I need to know if it was just bad luck, or if it was something else." David looked at me, and I saw a flicker of the old family feud in his eyes, a weariness. But then he looked at the genuine terror in my face, and his expression softened into one of grim resolve. "Your father and I, we don't see eye to eye, but you're my niece. Blood is blood." He sighed heavily. "All right, Lily, I'll help you. Where is the car now?" It had been towed to an impound lot just off the highway. Getting access wasn't easy. David had to call in a favor, claiming he was the family mechanic retained for insurance purposes. The lie worked. The next afternoon, we were standing in a dusty, sun-beaten lot, looking at the charred skeleton of the Subaru. It was worse than I remembered. It was a twisted, blackened husk, barely recognizable as a vehicle. The interior was gone, melted into a grotesque sculpture of plastic and metal. The engine was a blackened, exploded mess. David walked around it slowly, his expert eyes taking in every detail. He didn't speak for a long time. He knelt, peering at the undercarriage, his fingers gently probing the burnt frame. He had brought a toolkit and a powerful flashlight. "Okay," he said, his voice low and serious. "The fire started right here, near the engine block. See this discoloration on the metal? That's characteristic of a fuel-fed fire. It burned hot and fast." He moved to the front wheel well, shining his light onto a mess of melted tubes and wires. "Now, this is interesting." He pointed with a screwdriver. "This is what's left of your brake fluid reservoir. It's completely melted, but look at the line coming from it." He scraped away some of the soot. Even to my untrained eye, I could see it. It wasn't a clean break from the fire. There was a small, unnaturally clean slice on the corroded metal tubing, a section that was now warped by the heat. "This brake line wasn't just old, Lily," David said, his voice grim. "It was compromised. This slice, it looks like it was made with a pair of cutters. Not all the way through, but enough to create a weak spot. A pinhole leak. You wouldn't notice it at first. You just think the brakes were a little soft, but with the pressure of highway driving, it would give, all at once." My breath hitched, and the fire. He moved back toward the engine. "Same story. Here's the main fuel line. See this fitting?" He pointed to a brass connector. "It's loose, not just old car loose. It's been deliberately backed off, maybe half a turn. It would create a slow, steady drip of gasoline right onto the hot engine manifold." He stood up and looked me straight in the eye. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Lily," he said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "This wasn't an accident. This wasn't bad luck. Someone deliberately tampered with this car. They cut your brake line and loosened your fuel line. They didn't just sell you an unsafe car. They sabotaged it. They built you a bomb and waited for it to go off." The world tilted on its axis. Hearing it confirmed, so clinica. Ellie, so undeniably, was 1,000 times worse than just suspecting it. My father, the accountant who balanced ledgers. My mother, the teacher who cared for small children. They had meticulously planned my death. Tears I didn't know I was holding back began to stream down my face. David pulled a once-clean rag from his pocket and awkwardly handed it to me. Then, he did something he hadn't done since I was a little girl. He pulled me into a rough, grease-smelling hug. "It's okay," he murmured into my hair. "It's not okay, but you're safe now." He held me for a moment longer, then pulled back, his eyes blazing. "Your father is going to answer for this. I'll write up a full report. I'll sign it. I'll testify. What do you want to do, Lily?" I thought about the police. I thought about courts and lawyers, but I knew that wasn't the first step. The law could give me justice, but it couldn't give me answers. I needed to see their faces when they were confronted with the truth. I needed to hear it from their own mouths. "First," I said, my voice hard and steady, "I'm going to go home and have a talk with my parents." I walked into the house holding a manila envelope. Inside was Uncle David's report, a typed, 2-page document detailing his findings, complete with photographs of the sliced brake line and the loosened fuel fitting. It felt as heavy as a tombstone. My parents were in the living room, watching television. My father was in his recliner, and my mother was on the sofa, knitting. The scene was so placid, so utterly normal, that it made the rage simmering in my veins burn even hotter. They looked up as I entered, their expressions hardening into their usual mild annoyance at my presence. "Lily," my mother said without looking up from her needles, "I was about to call you. If you want dinner, you'll have to heat up the leftovers." "I'm not here for dinner," I said. My voice was eerily calm, devoid of the shaking I felt inside. I walked over to the television and turned it off. The sudden silence was deafening. "What is the meaning of this?" my father demanded, sitting up straighter in his chair. I held up the envelope. "I had the car looked at," I said, my eyes locking onto his, "by a professional." I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not guilt, but a flash of irritation, as if I had uncovered a well-hidden accounting error. My mother stopped knitting, her hands freezing in her lap. "And?" my father asked, his tone daring me to continue. I opened the envelope and took out the report. I didn't hand it to them, I held it. He found some interesting things, for an old car, that is. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. He found that the brake line had been deliberately cut, just a small slice, enough to make it fail under pressure. He also found that the fuel line fitting had been intentionally loosened, allowing gasoline to drip directly onto the hot engine. My mother's face went pale. My father's expression remained stubbornly neutral, but a small muscle began to twitch in his jaw. "That's a ridiculous accusation," he said, his voice dangerously low. "Your uncle has always been a bitter, jealous man. He's trying to cause trouble." "This isn't about Uncle David's bitterness," I shot back, my voice finally cracking with emotion. "This is about you. You bought that car knowing it was a death trap. Uncle David told you it was junk a month ago." That hit home. My father's carefully constructed composure finally fractured. "He has no proof of that." "He remembered you perfectly," I said, taking a step closer. "An accountant in his 50s with a condescending attitude. Sound familiar?" My mother finally spoke, her voice a high, reedy whine. "Lily, this is insane. We would never. Why would we ever do something like that?" And that was the question, the one I needed them to answer. The rage boiled over, and I finally screamed the words that had been choking me for days. "Why? Why would you do it? Just tell me why." The dam of their resentment, built up over 20 years, finally broke. It was my mother who cracked first. Her face, pale moments before, was now flushed with a sudden, ugly red. "Because you were a disappointment?" she shrieked, the words tearing out of her. "From the moment you were born, you were a disappointment. We wanted another son. We wanted a boy to be a companion for Ethan, to carry on the family name, to be strong. We went through so much to have a second child, and what did we get? You, a daughter." The confession, so raw and hateful, sucked the air from the room. She wasn't yelling anymore. She was speaking in a low, venomous hiss, all the years of fake smiles and thin-lipped tolerance melting away to reveal the molten core of her hatred. "Everything was supposed to be perfect," she continued, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of self-pity. "Richard was building his career, we had our perfect son, and then you came along. Another mouth to feed. Another college fund to worry about, and for what? So you can get married and change your name? You were a net loss from day one." I turned to my father, my heart splintering into a million pieces. "Dad," I whispered, a desperate, final plea for some shred of humanity. He looked at me, his face cold and impassive, like a judge delivering a sentence he had decided on long ago. "Your mother is being emotional," he said, his voice chillingly rational. "But she is not incorrect from a practical standpoint. Your brother, Ethan, is an investment. His success reflects on this family. Your pursuits, this engineering nonsense, it's a hobby. A costly one." He leaned forward, his eyes like chips of ice. "The car was an opportunity. An old vehicle, an unfortunate, tragic accident, it would have been clean. Our financial obligations would be lessened, and honestly, Lily, it would have solved a long-standing problem. It was just bad luck that you're so resilient." He said it so calmly. He spoke about my death as if he were discussing a line item on a budget. The plan hadn't been emotional or frantic. It had been a calculated business decision. I was an asset that wasn't performing, so I needed to be liquidated. There was no remorse in their faces, not a single shred of regret, only the bitter resentment of a failed plan. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry it hadn't worked. In that moment, the love I had desperately clung to, the faint, flickering hope that somewhere deep down they cared, was finally extinguished. It was gone. There was nothing left but the hollow, echoing truth. They didn't just favor my brother. They actively despised me for the simple fact of my existence. "You won't have to worry about the Lily problem anymore," I said, my voice strangely steady. I dropped the report onto the coffee table. "You won't have to worry about my costly hobbies or my college fund. You won't have to worry about me at all." I turned and walked toward the stairs, leaving them sitting in the suffocating silence of their own monstrosity. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was never, ever coming back. I packed with a numb, methodical efficiency. Sweaters, jeans, textbooks, my laptop. Every item I placed in my suitcase felt like a final punctuation mark on a chapter of my life I was slamming shut. There were no tears. The shock had burned them away, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't running away from home, I was escaping a threat. As I was zipping up my second bag, my bedroom door opened. It was Ethan. His face was pale, his expression a mixture of confusion and concern. He had clearly heard the shouting. "Lily, what's going on?" he asked, his eyes falling on my suitcases. "Where are you going?" I stopped what I was doing and looked at him, my brother, the sun around which my parents' world revolved. He was an unwilling participant in their cruelty, but his ignorance had been a shield for them for years. That shield was about to be shattered. "I'm leaving," I said simply. "Leaving? What are you talking about? Did you have a fight with Mom and Dad?" "You could call it that," I said, my voice laced with a bitterness I couldn't hide. I picked up the copy of David's report I'd made and held it out to him. "Read this." He took the papers, his brow furrowed in confusion. He began to read. I watched his face as he processed the words, the description of the sliced brake line, the loosened fuel fitting, the cold, mechanical summary of a deliberate act of sabotage. I saw the denial in his eyes first, a refusal to comprehend. Then, as he continued to read David's damning conclusion, the denial gave way to dawning horror. His hands began to shake. "No," he whispered, looking up at me, his face ashen. "No, this is crazy. Uncle David is just trying to stir up trouble. Dad was right." "Is he?" I asked, my voice flat. "Then go ask them, Ethan. Go downstairs and ask Mom and Dad if they tried to kill their own daughter." He stared at me, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the parents he knew, the loving, doting people who bought him a perfect car and praised his every move, with the monsters described in the report. He dropped the papers on my bed and turned, bolting from the room and down the stairs. I followed him, stopping at the top of the staircase to listen. "Mom, Dad," I heard Ethan's voice, trembling but loud. "What is this? Lily showed me this report from Uncle David. It's a joke, right? This is some kind of sick joke." There was a moment of silence. Then my father's voice, cold and firm. "Ethan, your uncle is a bitter man. He's trying to turn you against us." "This isn't about him, it's about what he wrote." Ethan's voice was rising in panic. "He says the car was sabotaged. He says you knew it was a wreck. Tell me it's not true." "Don't be naive, Ethan," my mother's voice cut in, sharp and defensive. "Your sister is twisting everything. She's always be." Dramatic, looking for attention. "Attention?" Ethan shrieked, and I heard a loud thud like he'd slammed his hand on a table. "She almost died. I saw her when she came home. You two were talking about how much money you'd lost on the car. I heard you. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Did you do it? Just answer me. Did you do this to her?" The silence that followed was heavy and damning. It was the only answer he needed. "Oh my God," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief and revulsion. "You did. You really did." "We did it for this family," my mother cried, her voice breaking. "We did it for you. She's always been a drain on us, a distraction from what's really important, your future." For me, Ethan's voice was now filled with a cold rage I had never heard from him before. "You tried to murder my sister and you're blaming it on me? You think I wanted this? You think I would ever want this?" He let out a harsh, broken laugh. "You're insane. You're both monsters." "Watch your tone, son," my father warned. "No, I'm done watching my tone," Ethan roared. "I'm done being your golden boy while you treat her like garbage. I never saw it. I was so stupid, I never saw how bad it was. But this is unforgivable. This is evil." I heard footsteps, fast and heavy, coming back up the stairs. Ethan appeared in the doorway of my room, his face a mess of tears and fury. He didn't even speak. He just walked past me into his own room and started pulling drawers open, grabbing clothes, and stuffing them into a duffel bag. Downstairs, our mother started wailing. "Ethan, no, don't leave, you can't leave us." Our father's voice was harder. "Ethan, get back down here. We need to discuss this like a family." Ethan emerged from his room, duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a profound, soul-deep apology. "I'm so sorry, Lily," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I never saw it." He walked over and picked up my suitcases. "I'll take these," he said. Together, we walked down the stairs. Our parents were standing in the entryway, their faces a mixture of desperation and disbelief. "Ethan, please," our mother begged, reaching for him. "Don't do this." He recoiled from her touch as if from a hot flame. He looked from her face to our father's. "You didn't just try to kill my sister," he said, his voice shaking with finality. "You killed this family. You talked about investments and losses. Well, here's your final ledger. You have lost both of your children." He turned his back on them, opened the front door, and we walked out into the night, leaving them standing alone in the ruins of the home they had shattered. 2 years have passed since that night. The silence that followed our departure was absolute. My parents tried to call, at first, dozens of times a day. First Ethan, then me. Their messages evolved from desperate pleas to angry demands, and finally to bitter, accusatory voicemails. We never answered. We never replied. To us, Richard and Alina ceased to exist the moment we walked out that door. The first few months were a blur. We crashed on Uncle David's couch, and he never once made us feel like a burden. He gave us space, he gave us hot meals, and most importantly, he gave us his unwavering belief. He treated us like his own children. Ethan and I found a small, 2-bedroom apartment near my university campus as soon as we could. He transferred colleges and got a part-time job to help with rent, shelving his own ambitions for a while to make sure I could continue my studies without interruption. For the first time in my life, I had a true partner. The brother who had once been the sun, orbited by everyone else, learned to be a planet himself, revolving with me in a new shared system built on mutual support and a fierce, protective love. We talked for hours, unspooling 20 years of a shared but separate childhood. He told me about the pressure he always felt to be perfect, a pressure he never understood the source of until now. I told him about the loneliness, the feeling of being invisible. We grieved for the family we should have had, and in doing so, we forged a new one. My engineering studies took on a new meaning. The theoretical became deeply personal. I threw myself into my work, focusing my senior project on vehicle safety systems, specifically designing a more robust, fail-safe braking mechanism for older cars. My professors called my work passionate and innovative. I just called it necessary. I graduated summa cum laude, with Ethan and Uncle David cheering the loudest in the audience. Today, I work as a junior design engineer for a major automotive company. It's my job to help make cars safer, to anticipate failure, to protect people from the kind of mechanical betrayal that was meant to end my life. Sometimes, I'll be looking at a brake line schematic or a fuel system diagram, and the memory of that burning Subaru will flash in my mind. It's not a traumatic flashback anymore. It's a reminder of why I do what I do. Ethan is back in school, finishing his business degree. He wants to work with Uncle David, to use his business acumen to expand the garage, to create a place built on honesty and integrity, everything our father's world was not. He and I are closer than ever. We are each other's anchor. I know my parents are still living in that house, just the two of them. I hear through the grapevine, the way you always do in small towns, that they are isolated, that old friends have fallen away. They put all their stock into one asset, and when they tried to violently liquidate the other, they triggered a total collapse of their portfolio. Their obsession with having the perfect son cost them both of their children. They got what they wanted in the end, a house with no daughter in it. They just didn't realize the son would leave, too. I have found a strange peace. The anger has cooled into a quiet resolve. The pain has scarred over, leaving not a weakness but a reminder of my own strength. They tried to write me off, to erase me from their ledger, but I survived. I balanced my own books, started a new life from scratch, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that my life is the furthest thing from a net loss. It's a profit I earned all on my own. For anyone out there who has ever been made to feel like a disappointment, like a second choice, or like you weren't what your parents wanted, your worth is not determined by their approval. Their failure to love you is not your failure. It is theirs and theirs alone. You can build your own family, you can forge your own path, and you can be your own measure of success. Take it from someone who walked out of the fire and never looked back.